Hey everyone, welcome to this session where I'm going to be talking about Azure VMware Solution, and we'll be asking the question whether it is the right choice for your Azure workloads. I'm going to be running through how to set up Azure VMware Solution, take a look at the solution at a very high level and compare it to running against traditional Azure IaaS and PaaS solutions. This session is my submission for this year's Azure Back to School, this great community initiative. You can check out the full schedule at azureback2school.com. You'll find the list of speakers, full session schedule available, and you can also check the hashtag Azure Back to School 2024 on Twitter, or X as it's now known. This great community event, yet again, been run by the wonderful Dwayne Natwick and the awesome Derek Smith. So thanks again to the guys for organising this again and for allowing us all to speak and contribute. A little bit about me. My name is Michael Durkin. I'm an Azure Cloud Architect and I've been an Azure MVP since 2023. I'm a LinkedIn Learning instructor, speaker and a blogger. So let's jump into what is Azure VMware Solution. So it's a full VMware based environment hosted in Azure. It's been VMware validated with ongoing validation and testing of enhancements and upgrades. It integrates with native Azure services and management tools. What it does, the advantage is it enables the seamless migration of your on-premises VMware workloads into Azure. You've got unified management. So you're not using the Azure Management Suite. You've got VMware tools like vCenter and vMotion available at your disposal, and you've got full support for vSphere, vSAN and NSXT running on Azure. Now, Azure VMware Solution is really a hot topic at the minute, and why is everyone talking about it? Well, everyone's talking about it because of this. It's because Broadcom completed their acquisition of VMware in November 2023. Now, Azure VMware Solution was available as an option in the Azure Service Stack before this, but I think what's happening now is that there's a lot of acceleration towards Azure VMware Solution, and a couple of reasons why. Obviously, with the Broadcom acquisition, they changed their licensing model. So perpetual licenses went away. There was a termination of VMware partner agreements and a transition to a subscription-based model. January 2024, there was the end of perpetual licensing. And then February 2024, we saw the sale of VMware's end-user computing division and the end of the free vSphere hypervisor. Now, we've all used that vSphere hypervisor, run up to 10 VMs on a vSphere. It was brilliant for small businesses and brilliant for personal use as well, but unfortunately that is now gone. That is no more. And a more significant one then, in April 2024, VMware on AWS was no longer sold by AWS or as channel partners, so that alternative version of VMware on cloud actually went away. If we take a look at the changes and the impact that this made, so Broadcom very quickly moved to consolidate and simplify their product offerings on VMware. I mentioned the end to the free vSphere hypervisor, the move from the perpetual to subscription licensing models. So basically the perpetual model is not available for purchase anymore, and even customers who were on perpetual licenses were told those agreements were ending. You need to move on to the subscription based model. And then there was the pricing increases, and the pricing increases were big, and a bit of understanding, little bit of thing behind that. So back in 2020, VMware amended their license metrics for many of their more popular products from per CPU to per core. And what you had an entitlement of 32 cores per CPU. But in 2023, they shifted this to 16 cores per CPU. And if you do the maths, for many customers with high core counts, that effectively doubled their license requirements, and that meant further purchasing, further licensing costs. If you then move and you add the perpetual to subscription model on top of that, in some cases customers were seeing a pricing increase of up to 800%. That's big. That's huge for anyone to take on. So why move to Azure VMware Solution? couple of reasons why people would do it, first of all. Okay, so first one is data center exit. Okay, so let's forget about all of the licensing stuff and the cost stuff and the per core stuff that we talked about there a second ago. You might want to have a data center exit. You might have aging hardware or aging storage, or basically not want to do a hardware refresh. You want to get out of the data center, get rid of those costs, move up into the cloud. Other option, data center extension. You might want to extend the data center without having to purchase new hardware, and VMware, Azure VMware Solution is obviously a solution to that. Same thing there. You might want to have the hybrid cloud model, where you've got certain things running in still on premise. You might want to have Azure VMware Solution and then utilize some Azure services in behind that from a modernization perspective. And then there's, you know, the old traditional one, the business continuity and disaster recovery. You might use Azure VMware Solution, Azure BCDR solution for your on-premises VMware. So let's take a look at how you kind of go about that. So there's obviously the traditional ways of planning, and the obvious one there is with Azure Migrate. So with Azure Migrate, you can use either the traditional Azure Migrate appliance, or you can go for another traditional old method that we all know and love, which is the RV Tools assessment, which you can run on your VMware estate, and it'll give you all of the various metrics that you need to take from all of your underlying VMs. Of course, RV Tools is standalone, point in time snapshot of what's happening on your VMs. With Azure Migrate, obviously you can plug it in, you can run a full discovery of all the VMs of what's happening, and with that can bring you then into your assessment phase. Okay, and I've just listed off some of the things here that you would normally plug into an assessment phase with Azure VMware Solution. So let's go in and let's take a quick look at those now. We'll expand out on those. So as you can see here, you can create your assessment type there. Up at the top is you're running this as an Azure VMware Solution assessment, and with the discovery source you can see servers discovered from Migrate appliance, but you also have an option underneath that to import from RV Tools. You can set your sizing criteria, your target location, and you can set your reserved capacity. We'll get into that in a minute. One important thing to note here is any Microsoft-based guest OSs running in AVS are eligible for hybrid benefits. So you can bring your own licenses to the cloud to do a further cost reduction there if needs be. If we look into the assessment settings, and this was the list of things that I showed on the other screen, so this is where you can kind of fine tune how your assessment looks. So you've got your locations, you've got your reserved instance, your VM size. That's a slightly misleading one. This is actually the node size and the size of the node that you're going to provision within to host your Azure VMware Solution nodes. One thing to note here, you've got a minimum commit of 3 nodes. If you're moving and if you're provisioning AVS, you have to have 3 nodes running. As you can see there, you can set RAID levels, CPU, memory, dedupe, stretch cluster, your node size, a couple of sizing criteria. Normally it's best to go with as on premises, and then you've got your pricing models. So you can go for, you know, pay as you go, you can go for reserved instance, you can go for hybrid benefit, etc. Once you've done that, you then come in here, you can select your servers to assess, and from your either your Azure Migrate appliance or your RV Tools input, you can actually select which servers you want to have included as part of your AVS assessment. And what it all does at the end of that, when you're in your assessment, is it spits out something like this. It's going to give you your cost estimate, it's going to give you the readiness of your VMs over there in top middle, readiness of your on-premises VMs to move and migrate to AVS, a number of assessed virtual machines, and then below that you've got your sizing assumptions that you plugged into your assessment and your utilization across nodes. Let's take a look at what the readiness means. So obviously, ready for AVS means it can be migrated as is without any changes. Ready with conditions means there may be some compatibility stuff that you need to address. Not ready means the VM will not start in AVS, and there is going to be remediation guidance that you're going to be able to perform in order to help you, get over that hurdle and get that particular or those particular VMs ready to migrate. And then finally, you've got readiness unknown, and readiness unknown can tend to happen with, things like, non-Microsoft or non-detectable OSs that are available, or maybe some legacy OSs that are running. We take a look, quite simple map, and again, this is taken directly from the Microsoft website. This is effectively how it is going to look and how it's going to live. Your Azure VMware Solution Private Cloud is going to live within your Azure subscription, underpinned by Azure Virtual Networks, and with access to those back-end Microsoft native services that are available over there on the right. Recommendation is you connect it via an express route back to your on-premises environment. It just means it's a more stable connection than going over public internet or site-to-site VPNs. If we take a look at post-assessment, you've done your discovery, you've done your assessment, you're now ready to request your hosts. And as we saw in the assessment there, you can size a particular host type, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what you need to do is you need to request a host quota. That can take 5 business days. What that's doing is that's Microsoft effectively provisioning the hosts for you in the background, making sure that they're ready to go when you go to provision your service. Next step is you need to identify what subscription your Azure VMware Solution service is going to live in. One of the prerequisites here, it must be an EA or a CSP based subscription. You need to identify the region where AVS will be hosted, and this is an important one because this ties in with the type of node you're going to use. Okay, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but certain nodes are only available in certain regions. So for example, in North Europe, I believe the only node you can provision is an AV36 node, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And then there are some mixture of nodes available in various other different regions. So that's an important one as well. Obviously, from a region perspective as well, there's an importance there around, your data residency and your sovereignty requirements. So that's an important one as well. Final one then is identify the resource group where you want to provision your hosts. Again, in a normal case, you would provision your AVS within a dedicated resource group. I touched on hosts briefly a second ago on the last slide, and there are 4 host types that you can choose from, but there's a catch. There's actually only 3. So if we take a look down through them, they're called AV36, AV36P, and AV52. So as you can see, different sizes, different capabilities. With AV36, you're starting with 36 physical, 72 logical cores. You get the same thing on the AV36P, except you're getting a higher RAM and higher raw vSAN capacity. You move down to AV52, then you're jumping again to your 52 physical, 104 logical cores. With AV64, that's actually an add-on host. Okay, that's an add-on SKU. What that means is that if you have provisioned your host type as AV36, another important thing to note here, if you provision AV36, you can't mix and match. I talked about the minimum 3 hosts commitment there. So if you choose AV36, you have to provision 3 AV36s. Okay, with the AV64, you can then add that on as an add-on host to any of the combinations above. So if you go for 3 AV36s, you can add an AV64 or 2 AV64s. There's no limit to what you can add, but it's important to note you have to start with a baseline of 3 from the 3 options at the top, and then you can add AV64s to that. We would not be living in a Microsoft Azure world or doing this presentation without talking about networking. And again, networking is one of the core parts to make your Azure VMware solution work. What you need to do, you need to define a network for your private cloud management. So Azure VMware Solution by default requires a /22 CIDR network, and in general the rule of thumb is that cannot overlap with any existing Azure or on-premises networks. What that's going to have is that's going to contain your management, your vMotion, and your replication networks. They'll be provisioned automatically within that CIDR block. You then need a network for your VM workloads. Important thing is that that shouldn't overlap with the private cloud management network that you defined above. You know, and I think that's going to be a standard thing. And you may have to define, depending on your networking requirements, you may have broken that up into other VNets, subnets, VLANs, etc. on your on-premises. Same thing applies. If you need that, you define multiple networks or multiple network segments for your VM workloads. The other thing is, we talked about ExpressRoute, one of the previous pages. You need to define your virtual network gateway. Okay, so that is an Azure Virtual Network with an ExpressRoute circuit, and that can utilize an existing ExpressRoute circuit, an existing Azure Virtual Network Gateway, if you have these available. Final thing then is to define your VMware HCX network segments. So important thing to note about what is VMware HCX. VMware HCX is the mobility platform that is used for simplifying your migration, for rebalancing your workloads and optimizing your disaster recovery. HCX effectively has got two components. You've got a HCX Cloud Manager, which is going to sit on the cloud side in your Azure VMware Solution, and then you've got a HCX connector. And the HCX connector is going to live on your on-premises network, and that's basically going to provide the connectivity between your on-premise VMware and your Azure VMware Solution. Final thing then, you know, once you've done all of that, we are going to extend, or you can do, is you can extend your on-premises networks. This is an optional step. And you know, some companies may have that. They may want to retain IP addressing. That is an option, and that is available to you. From a deployment and integration perspective, once you've got your hosts requested and once you've got your networking set up, in your subscription you need to register the AVS provider, and then you go ahead and with all of the options that you had previously selected, i.e. your hosts, the various networks that you provisioned, you can create your AVS private cloud in Azure, and you can do that via either the portal or the CLI. You then connect to the virtual to your Azure Virtual Network with ExpressRoute. You connect to your on-premises environment and you install and activate your VMware HCX. And finally, you connect to your vCenter. Okay, and basically this again uses native vCenter tooling, so you can, in a single vCenter, connect your on-premises and your AVS in the same view. If we have a look at how it looks when it's provisioned, okay, so if we look down the left hand side here, you can see you've got your connectivity clusters, your VMware credentials, and that's where we're looking at the minute, where you can see you've got your vCenter server credentials there and your NSXT manager credentials. That's how it looks from an Azure portal management view. And from a VMware, from a vSphere view, it looks exactly the same as your native VMware. Okay, so you've got that familiarity built in there straight away for your admins who are going to be using this. So that's a very, very high level whistle stop tour of Azure VMware Solution. What are the pros and cons? Okay, if we take a look at the pros, if you look at it, it's the ease of migration. Okay, it simplifies your transition to the cloud. It is a lift and shift, but it is simplifying it there. And that brings me on to the next point, which is your operational continuity. As we saw, you're still using your familiar VMware tools, VMware services, VMware processes like vSphere, NSXT, vMotion. They're all still there in place. But at the back end of that then, this is again about the hosts and the SKUs and all that sort of thing, you can leverage Azure's global infrastructure as well. So for example, if you didn't want to add a host but wanted to add more storage, you could use a service such as NetApp. If you wanted to do backups of the solution, you can use Azure Backup, or you can use third-party tools like Zerto or Veeam or something like that. So all of that familiarity is still there for you. Taking a look at the cons, so it's potentially higher costs compared to traditional VMware environments. Okay, in saying that, what you're getting for your cost of your hosts over, let's say if you go for reserved instances over 3 years, that includes your license costs if you want. So what you're doing there is you're tying yourself into a consistent licensing model. Okay. There is complexity, obviously. Hybrid environments can add complexity to that. And again, we have to say the primary focus here is on a lift and shift. So you're basically lifting VMware to VMware. You're limiting your modernization, and you're basically extending the lifetime or delaying your cloud native transformation. If we take a look at AVS versus traditional Azure IaaS, let's think about the old traditional VMs and VM scale sets and availability sets and things like that. Okay, if you were to go for IaaS instead of AVS, okay, effectively you're moving from VM to VM, but you are effectively going and you're landing in Azure's native suite. Okay, so you've got your Azure networking, your Azure storage, your Azure compute all around it. You probably have greater flexibility, okay, and you've got greater flexibility around designing custom infrastructure and networking solutions. As we saw there, you've got to define the networks for Azure VMware Solution where your workloads are going to live. Okay, you've obviously got greater flexibility around resource groups and isolating things off into different environments and RBAC roles and all that good stuff that comes with Azure native solutions. There's also the cost efficiency bit. So let's say, as I just said there, you go for a 3-year reserved instance of Azure VMware Solution. What if you modernize within those couple of years? Is that potentially wasted money when you could be getting the cost efficiency from the Azure IaaS piece instead? If we look at the native Azure networking benefits, you can tie into advanced security features like Azure Firewall, DDoS protection. From a high availability perspective, you can leverage load balancer, traffic manager, and all of those other good network services for high availability, resiliency, and a better global network reach as well. So you can use Azure's global network to optimize your delivery and your user experience. That's IaaS. If we take a look at Azure PaaS services, or the old traditional cloud native services, which are really, the big drive at the minute. Obviously, with that PaaS modernization, you're leveraging the full suite of Azure's cloud native capabilities. What's the advantage of this versus IaaS? It means that you don't have that underlying OS layer to manage. Microsoft are doing that for you. You're just looking at the front end of the services, things like app service, API management, service bus for messaging, things like that. You're reducing, as I said, in the efficiency, you're reducing the management overhead, because obviously with OSs and with images, you've got to manage those, you've got to update them, you've got to do that. You move to PaaS, you don't have to do that. And that then leads you into an innovation path. So you've got access to those services like AI, machine learning, and those serverless computing services that I talked about. If we look at Azure VMware Solution versus Azure PaaS, obviously, migration speed, is faster with AVS because it's effectively a lift and shift. You've got the operational familiarity, as I mentioned, with, existing VMware processes and tools. But from a modernization perspective, PaaS, yes, it does require more effort. It's going to be a longer journey for you to get to the cloud, so you'll suffer the burn of staying on premises with your on-premises VMware, but it's going to offer you greater long-term benefits when you move up to those native Azure PaaS services. Strange one here if we take a look at effort comparisons. Okay, so if we look at this in terms of, across the three that we talked about, across Azure VMware Solution, the IaaS and the PaaS stuff. So from an ease of migration, Azure VMware Solution, we said it's easy, it's lift and shift, it's move the stuff out. With IaaS and native networking, there's going to be moderate ease of migration there. There's a little bit more effort involved. where you're going to have to migrate directly into VMs. There's a bit more work to it around the native networking, but you get the benefits of it. With PaaS, no. As we said, that's a much longer term, and we can see here in terms of operational familiarity. We talked about Azure VMware Solution. With IaaS and PaaS, you're basically learning the Azure stack over again from a networking, storage, compute, and all of the underlying services perspective. Scalability with Azure VMware Solution, as we saw, you're adding hosts to the equation. With IaaS and native networking and PaaS, obviously, they're scalable. They're fully there. They're fully available. Once you move away from IaaS, from VMs into those cloud native services, the scalability, it happens at a click and it's always available to you. Much higher cost efficiency when you move to PaaS, and obviously you've got the cloud native benefits as well, which you don't get with moving to Azure VMware Solution. From a migration approach perspective, obviously with Azure VMware Solution, you're building your landing zone and you're setting up your vMotion. That's it. Phase 2 then is your refactoring of your applications, your innovation, your cost optimization. That can come a bit quicker, and then it moves into your app modernization and your microservices. Then with IaaS, your phase 1 becomes slightly more elongated, so you've got to build that out, landing zone, you've got to build your lift and shift migration, but you've got to get all your backup, monitoring and management in place as well. And obviously with PaaS then, landing zone, phase 1 is a longer one because you've got all of the app modernization pieces. Excuse me. And that means it takes longer to get over to the AI ML piece. From a cost comparisons perspective, and if we look at migration time, cost, we've said there it takes days to move to Azure VMware Solution. It may take a little while longer to move to Azure IaaS and networking. And then if we get down into, the PaaS, that's a much longer term. So you can see here, and obviously the one at the end is about unlocking the full potential of Azure. That's an important one as well, because with Azure VMware Solution, you're only partially unlocking, but whereas with the other two, you're going for a full migration of the services. So to conclude, Azure VMware Solution is going to give you operational continuity, scalability, and you'll be able to leverage your existing skills and investments for your workforce. It's obviously an excellent option given the current shift in the market with what has happened with Broadcom, and obviously for people who are looking to exit the data center quickly and move towards the cloud. The alternatives obviously are there. We went through those. We looked at Azure IaaS and native networking, and we looked at PaaS, and we looked at the flexibility and the efficiency and the benefits that they will give you. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this session. Thanks again to Derek and Dwayne for putting on this amazing community event again. Please feel free to reach out to me on any of my socials. My website, michaeldurkin.com. You can check out or contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and please feel free to contact me. Please feel free to give any feedback or if you need any further information on this topic. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next one.